What if I told you that power doesn't sit where you think it does? That parliaments, presidents, even popes, are little more than actors in a grander play. Behind them, hidden in the folds of history, are families whose names you rarely hear aloud. Aristocrats who traded crowns for banks, who cloaked themselves not in velvet, but in secrecy. They are called the Black Nobility. Could ancient bloodlines, some stretching back to Rome itself, still be pulling the levers of finance, religion, and politics today? If true, it would mean democracy is only theater, and the script was written centuries ago. But hold on, that's a lot to take in. So slow down with me. Imagine the curtain lowering after the first act and the stage lights dimming. Beneath the noise of daily politics, a quieter story waits. A shadow story, one that whispers rather than shouts. The idea of families ruling from the shadows is not new. It lingers in folklore and hushed conversations, in the kind of conspiratorial aside your eccentric uncle might bring up at dinner. Yet history itself provides fertile ground for suspicion. Think of Renaissance Italy, where popes were chosen with more family intrigue than divine inspiration. Think of Venice, where merchants in masks decided the fate of empires. Think of marriages that fused fortunes across kingdoms, ensuring that names like Orsini or Colonna never really vanished. Tonight, you and I will slip quietly into that other history, the one most textbooks politely avoid. Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. You begin in a time when the line between sacred and profane was less a wall and more a velvet curtain, easily drawn aside by those with enough coin or bloodline. The phrase Black Nobility didn't appear overnight. It rose from the chiaroscuro of Renaissance Italy, a world steeped in gold-leafed indulgences and backroom coronations. The term itself emerged later, but its roots were firmly planted in that epoch, when the papal states were less a spiritual domain and more a chessboard, each bishopric a square to be captured by wealthy landed families whose bloodlines wrapped around Rome like ivy. The term nobiltà nera, or black nobility, was originally coined in the 19th century after the unification of Italy, when certain aristocratic families loyal to the Pope were stripped of their privileges by the new secular government. These were the families who refused to recognize the authority of the newly formed Kingdom of Italy and clung instead to papal sovereignty. But their real history, their story of power and manipulation, stretches much further back, long before they were branded black. In truth, they had never needed official titles to rule. Their currency was always subtler marriages, patronage, silence. Picture the Roman palazzos of the 1500s, where men in finely embroidered doublets argued not over theology, but over whose son would marry whose niece to secure the next cardinal's hat. Think of Pope Sixtus V, whose appointments often aligned suspiciously well with Orsini and Aldobrandini interests. Or Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, whose papacy was less a spiritual reign and more a family business nepotism codified in Latin. His daughter Lucrezia was married off like a diplomatic telegram, first to Giovanni Sforza, then to Alfonso of Aragon, and finally to Alfonso d'Este, each move shifting alliances as neatly as gold across a ledger. This was the alchemy of the early black nobility, a fusion of spiritual authority and bloodline ambition. It wasn't just about who wore the mitre, but who paid for the marble under the altar. Wealthy families such as the Chigi Farnese and Colonna didn't just influence the church, they infiltrated it, and not always from the pulpit. Some held offices, others simply bankrolled them. The real seat of power often rested not in the Vatican halls, but in drawing rooms heavy with incense and strategy. One of the earliest indicators of this fusion was the rise of the Camerlengo, the papal chamberlain responsible for administering the Vatican's wealth. Appointees were often drawn from powerful families who viewed the office as both a privilege and an investment. Managing papal revenues meant overseeing landholdings, taxations, and diplomatic bribes. It was a role requiring discretion, allegiance, and occasionally the ability to smile while orchestrating an assassination. And yet, for every historical record detailing the economic reach of these families, there remains a fog, one filled with speculation, conflicting accounts, and deliberate omissions. Did the Black Nobility actively orchestrate conclaves planting their preferred candidates onto the throne of St. Peter? Or were they simply opportunists benefiting from proximity? One thing is clear: they understood the art of remaining just outside the spotlight. They wielded influence like a rapier, slender, elegant, and easily concealed. Modern scholars have debated the retroactive application of the term Black Nobility. Some argue it's a political label attached by the Vatican loyalists to cast themselves as martyrs after losing temporal power. Others suggest the term was weaponized during Italy's turbulent post-unification years, when monarchists, clericalists, and republicans all vied for the pen that would write history. Still, others go further, claiming the phrase was deliberately coined to shroud deeper truths, to create a category so vague it could absorb all manner of allegations without ever settling into clarity. But perhaps that vagueness is part of the genius. Because how do you challenge a power you can't define? A family that appears in baptismal records, but not in election rolls. A name that shows up in the papal archives only when it is attached to a generous donation, a land grant, or the sudden appearance of an ambitious young nephew in red robes. Of course, it's easy to romanticize. History students love the spectacle, the gold, the conspiracy, the velvet-draped candlelight. But even in its mundane moments, the origin of the Black Nobility whispers of a kind of power most modern institutions would kill to possess power without visibility, without liability, and without term limits. After all, a king must die. A CEO must retire. But a family, a bloodline that endures. It rebrands. It waits. You might remember from our opening how the line between church and commerce blurred early in this tale.